Many companies take philanthropy seriously. Canadian Tire has Jumpstart. McDonald's has Ronald McDonald House. And of course, Canada's Big Five banks sponsor all manner of events. It's good for the brand and perhaps for tax benefits, but could it also be good for the bottom line? Phil Hayde is co-founder and CEO of Public Inc., a Toronto-based social impact agency, and he sees real opportunities to merge corporate social responsibility with profit. And Phil Hayde joins us now for more. Nice to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Just start by telling us, Public Inc., what is the mission of your agency?
So the mission is very simple. It's to help brands profit with purpose. And what that really means is taking social impact and social issues and thinking about how it can create not just community benefit, but actually drive the bottom line. Whether that's, selling a product, acquiring a new customer, retaining a customer, or actually attracting top talent to the organization.
For years, we were told that the only thing companies need to worry about is making money. And then came this thing called CSR, corporate social responsibility. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so corporate social responsibility started as a recognition that it wasn't just about cutting checks anymore, right? That was the beginning. It was philanthropy. Companies felt like they should do something and they'd write a big check. And I think over time what happened was companies said, well, maybe we should be a bit more strategic about it. Maybe we should think about where do we want to put our money, and maybe it could add up to more. And that sort of birthed the corporate social responsibility. But I think what's happened is that in creating CSR, it separated the profit motive from the community impact motive. So it always was sort of put to the side as this nice thing you did to be a good citizen. And what we are trying to really accelerate is a different idea. It's this idea of profit with purpose, or Michael Porter talks about shared value. And that idea is about saying, it's not about the mitigation of harm, it's actually about the creation of value. How could social purpose, social impact, actually drive your business? Because the belief is that when those things come together, you'll create more impact and you'll actually drive a bigger bottom line.
How tough a sell is that for businesses?
Well, it's interesting. So we started the company in 2008. So our timing was fantastic. Like the economy was
beginning of the Great Recession.
Exactly. The economy was destroyed, and we were trying to sell people on this idea, and we couldn't get companies to really buy it. We could certainly point to a Unilever brand, right? We could point to a Ben & Jerry's, but by and large, companies didn't behave this way. And because they saw the community CSR impact stuff as a cost on the bottom line. And so when we're saying, no, it doesn't have to be a cost, this can actually drive your business, they'd say, well, prove it to us. And you could only prove, you could only point to a few examples. So the evolution of this is saying, look, there's a different way of doing it. And now fast forward to 2016, as we go into 2017, and there's an explosion happening.
Explosion meaning what percentage of companies in Ontario would be doing this?
So fair enough. So I would say almost every company is doing something that would be more CSR. But when I say explosion, what I see is all kinds of companies who are the starting point is they actually want to solve a social problem, and they're doing it through a business model. So I can give you some examples. Some of them are US and some of them are Canadian. If you look at, in the United States, for example, Tesla is one that I think a lot of your viewers would know.
Sure, the car guys.
The car guys, and it's a product that's actually good for the planet, right? CVS, which is like a Rexall or,
drugstore.
Exactly, a drugstore, decided a few years ago they were going to be a health organization. And the first thing that they did is they said, we're not going to sell tobacco anymore. And they took a $2 billion hit. And they started introducing all kinds of health products. They've made up that $2 billion, and now they're extremely profitable. But there's all kinds of examples happening in the Canadian marketplace. We started working with a company called Maple that's all about telemedicine and creating greater access for people who need healthcare in the moment, right? We're working with a vertical farming company that's saying we can create great greens, great lettuce and produce here in Canada in a carbon neutral way. And this is happening all over the place. So these are companies saying, we can actually solve a social problem, and we can do it in a way that'll make us a lot of money.
Let me ask a bit of a smart aleck question on behalf of the skeptics who would say, it's all well and good for you sort of downtown Toronto, lefty types to champion this kind of thing, but the real hard-nosed business person, convince them of the relevance of this.
Yeah.
Go ahead. How tough is that?
So, it's getting much easier, and I'll tell you why. You look at a Tom's Shoes. So this is this one-for-one model that everyone knows about. They just sold half of their company. So they grew sort of a meteoric rise. They just sold half of their company to Bain for $650 million, as an example of it. You look at a company like Patagonia, which is really the poster child for baking purpose into the heart of their business. This is a company that has sales well over $300 million in profit, every single year, and continues to grow. A company that on Black Friday, so just had Thanksgiving in the U.S., and they tell their customers, reuse your clothing, don't just keep buying new. And they do that, and they still make more money because they have an authentic brand. So you start looking at all these interesting proof points. You look at Goldman Sachs and BlackRock, right? You have investment banks that have now got social impact investing divisions. So the sale to the skeptic is actually getting much easier because they're seeing you can actually have a triple bottom line. You can have both, right? And that's what's, I think, spurring this shift that's happening in the market.
Just take another 10 seconds, and for those who don't know, Tom's Shoes and Patagonia, what business are they in, and why do we know them?
Sure. So Tom's Shoes sort of came out of nowhere, but basically it's a shoewear company, and they sell all kinds of fashionable shoes. But the idea is that when you buy a pair, they will provide a pair to someone in need in the developing world. And they've taken this sort of one-for-one model, and they've expanded to all kinds of other products. Patagonia is an outdoor wear company. So they have from jackets to climbing gear, you name it, but it's outdoor gear. And what's so special about them is that the founder, Yvon Chouinard, from day one was about really thinking about how a company can live in harmony with the planet. And so they do incredible things. I'll give you one example. They decided that they didn't feel the way in which they were harvesting cotton was very eco-friendly. And so they came up with a whole new process in which to do it. And they did it, and then they put it through their whole supply chain. And then they gave it to all their competition, right? So this is a company and they continue to grow. They have huge profits, they've got huge following, and they're doing it in harmony with trying to have a very good eco-footprint and improving communities.
The suggestion, though, is that if you act in a more corporately, socially responsible way, there's probably one Lee too many in that line. Anyway, if you do that, you will necessarily be profitable because of all of the extra add-ons that entails. And I have to believe that there are examples of people trying to act in a more corporately, socially responsible way, but it doesn't happen, and the bottom line gets affected and tarnishes the brand. That's got to happen, right? What do you do under those circumstances?
It does happen, and I think that there's a number of reasons for it. We don't believe that social purpose is the be-all and end-all for a business, right? We talk about sort of, in classic marketing terms as 4 Ps, right? You've got your product and your promotion and your placement and your price. And we're saying there's a 5th P in that equation, and that's called purpose. And it's not the be-all and end-all, but it needs to be part of the equation set. And so it doesn't always work. There are companies that try to do something, but if they don't do it in an authentic way, it can absolutely backfire. Right? So it's not the be-all and end-all, but what we're finding is that when companies have started to really think about how social purpose and impact in community can be a real economic driver for them and a community driver, generally speaking, we have not found many companies to fail in that regard because it's very authentic.
Okay, what if you as a business person have decided that your purpose in life is to get as many frying pans into as many homes and kitchens in the country as possible, not to send kids to day camp?
Right.
Is that okay with you?
I think, look, companies, in the old model, companies were there to do one thing, and that was to increase shareholder value and to maximize that. I think today there's a recognition that companies, they exist within communities. And so you can't divorce one from the other. It's the same way that as we've evolved on the environmental front, we've said you can't not put a price on the use of water and energy and so on. So some companies won't use social purpose, and that's fine. But we often find that if you are a challenger brand, so if you're not first in class, right, and you've got a product that isn't particularly differentiated in the marketplace, well, part of our argument is maybe social purpose is the way to do it. Not always, but we think it can work well.
Interesting. Okay, we wanted to just let you in on a little sort of behind the scenes in the control room as we tried to put this together. We wanted to actually have a number of companies join you today and have a discussion about this. And for some reason, we had a very difficult time getting people from businesses that do employ corporate social responsibility to come on this program and talk about it. Is there something odd about, or let me say, does it in your view, does it jeopardize what these companies are trying to do by sort of overtly coming on television and talking about these efforts?
Well, personally, I don't think so. I think it's actually extremely helpful, right? It's the old adage that, it's really important to promote what you're doing. And it's not about promoting yourself, it's about promoting your issue. I'll give you a great example. I'm very proud of it. We are launching next week with Maple Leaf Foods a whole platform around food insecurity. So there's, as you know well, there are 4 million people in this country who don't have regular access to affordable, nutritious food in a country as plentiful as this. And so we have mapped an entire strategy for Maple Leaf Foods to really come out on that issue and to really advance this issue, both to create community impact and to think about how it can better the business. But it's coming from the right place. So the hesitancy, I think, for some brands to not want to talk about that, I think is a mistake. Because if you look at what companies have done, if you look at Howard Schultz in the United States with Starbucks, yeah. I think he's been an incredible leader in using advocacy, taking advocacy positions and using the pulpit of a big brand like Starbucks, who many of us drink every single day, and saying, this is important, we have a responsibility, and he believes it very strongly. So he comes out and talks about Black Lives Matter. He comes out and talks about, with Race Together, which was controversial because it wasn't well implemented, but the idea of saying we've got a race issue in this country and we should talk about it, why shouldn't companies talk about this? So I think the hesitancy is there's this fear that if we're not perfect, if we're not completely buttoned down, then somehow we can't talk about it. And I think if you have to be perfect, you'll never get anything done, and you'll never take action. And so I think companies have to shift their mindset around this, and it's not about perfection. It's about authenticity, and it's about doing things that are legitimate and real, and trying to move the needle.
I wonder if some of it's also just sort of classically Canadian. We're kind of afraid to boast about all the good that we're doing out there.
I think there's something to that. I joke, but it's actually quite serious, that I find, because we work in Canada and the United States, and what I'm amazed by is you can pretty much call anyone in the US without knowing them, bang on the door, and they'll answer. And they want to hear your pitch. They want to hear what you're up to. In Canada, unless you have a direct contact to somebody, they won't pick up the phone. And so I think there is this reservation that we have about overly boastful. But I don't think, again, it's about boasting about how great you are as a company. It's actually about boasting and promoting the issue that you care about. I think Bell's done a good job on mental health on that. It's not saying, look at us, aren't we great, we're Bell. They're saying we have a real issue around access to mental health services, and we have a real issue on stigma, and we're going to talk about it.
I wonder, Phil, whether some of this is rooted in the fact that we don't trust our governments as much anymore to provide a lot of these services that maybe back in the day we used to depend on them for, and therefore corporations are seeing the need to step into areas, around social services that governments traditionally used to handle.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it reflects well on business. On the other hand, do you see it, sort of reflecting poorly on government because we just don't trust them as much to do this anymore?
I think so, actually. And I think that, the argument is that if companies sort of step up to the plate too much, it's actually letting governments off the hook. And I think that's an old way of looking at the problem, because I think that suggests that, we have this model where you've got government in the nonprofit sector and corporate, and, there's some interaction. But I think that there's a blending happening. I do think that, the old adage that governments follow, they don't lead anymore. And I don't think that's categorically true, but I think it's true oftentimes. And so companies are stepping up to the plate, I think, in a different way. And it's being driven by the fact that employees want it. Consumers are actually starting to demand it. And that line between being a consumer and a citizen, I actually think that is starting to come together in a totally different way. And so companies are standing up because they recognize that what is actually important to their consumer and to their employees, and to a certain extent to their stakeholders of supply chain. So if Walmart says you need to be environmentally friendly and you want to be in our stores, that has a major impact. So I do think you're seeing a lot of companies step up in a new way. And my hope is that in doing so, actually they can be a bit of the sort of the skunk works, as it were, for governments. Take an issue, work on it, fund it, collaborate on it, prove that something works, and then sort of say to government, hey, look, we've proven it. You've got money now. Let's build in a bigger ecosystem to advance it. I think there's a big opportunity there.
The argument I've always heard is that we don't want food banks to be too successful, because that lets government off the hook with anti-poverty programs. If the community comes together and feeds those who have food insecurity too well, governments will say, oh, okay, we don't have to do that then.
That's right.
And you don't want to let government off the hook in that case, the argument goes.
That's right. And so, back to the Maple Leaf example, what we've said is when we started to look at the ecosystem of this issue, we said, you know, what's really interesting is that there is lots and lots of amazing initiatives happening on the ground. But they're highly localized, they're quite politicized, actually, and there isn't a lot of sharing happening. What if we could start to find those real innovations? Not where they're just using food as sort of feeding somebody who needs it, which is important, but actually using food as a starting point to say, well, how do we actually build someone's skills or capacity to shift their trajectory out of poverty? If we could find those organizations and then scale them up and take what we're learning from a measurement and evaluation and share that, and then use the pulpit of a big brand like Maple Leaf Foods and a leader like Michael McCain and actually get behind initiatives like Food Secure Canada and a national food policy, well, that's a way in which you could then, you're not letting government off the hook, but you're coming to the table with a whole lot more and saying, you need to be part of this party. And I think that is an approach that you're going to see a lot more from companies.
I wonder if, just in our last couple of minutes here, let me throw one more thing on the table.
Yeah.
I wonder if there is not some timidity out there among corporations about really diving into this because, for example, you know, what if you set up I'm pulling this out of thin air.
Yeah.
What if you set up a Ronald McDonald House and then for whatever reason it didn't work? You know, if for whatever reason you had to shut it down or there was a problem with the zoning or who knows what, a myriad problems can happen. Then you get kind of you get a black eye after trying to do something good.
Yeah.
Do you find companies who are afraid to go into this space because they just don't need that headache?
Absolutely. But I would say the same of nonprofits and the same of government. I think in this country we're way too risk averse, right? And part of the whole innovation agenda that we hear a lot, we read a lot, we talk a lot about is that we don't have an ecosystem that really fuels failure. And I think it's a huge problem. And so yes, I see it every day in my work with companies. But it's a problem. We have to be investing in this. We shouldn't be afraid to try things and fail. That's the whole scientific approach, right? You try, you learn, it fails, you try again, and so on.
That is not a Canadian approach. Canadians hate to fail. That's
right, but it's why we aren't innovating the way we should be. And so I think, yes, you're absolutely right. There's lots of companies that are afraid to do so. But if if you set out and say, this is the kind of change we want to create on an issue, and we believe we're here, and this is the path to get there, and you're actually really honest and transparent about what you're doing. Unilever is a good example of that. They've got the Sustainable Living Plan, and they actually create a scorecard that shows where they're at on the path towards trying to cut their footprint in half and increase their profits, like trying to double their profits. And so they're nowhere close to that, but they're actually very transparent about where they are in the process. And I think that's a model for a lot of companies. Stake out an issue, figure out why that aligns with your business, and then say, we're here, we want to get to here, and then be really open and honest about what it's going to take, and try things and take risks. I don't think consumers or citizens will penalize people for taking action that's legitimate, even if it fails. Right? I think we should be penalizing companies and governments and for nonprofits that never actually try anything net new and are happy with 1 or 2% incremental growth, and then we complain about the fact that we have these intractable problems like poverty and housing.
Do well by doing good.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
That's
Thank
Phil
you for having
Hay,
me.
CEO and co-founder of Public, Inc.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.